Oh, and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We're broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m, broadcasting on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and also partly on TikTok. And we are teleprompter free. Folks. This is as live as it gets. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, smash that thumbs up button, because that is the prime way in which YouTube is alerted to our program and pushes it out as a recommendation to other viewers throughout the world. So please give us a thumbs up if you are watching on YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, please like and share, folks. We're relying upon our viewers to get this broadcast out there. And on Twitter, please do give us a repost in order that more and more people will know that the premier pro-UK, pro-Union show is live tonight between 7 and 8 p.m. And wow, at 7:30 have we got a guest for you. The great, the one and only David Kurten, leader of the Heritage Party, former Assembly member of the London Assembly, and also a commentator on GB News, among other places. He is going to be with us tonight, and we know that so many people love David Kurten, and we're so happy and so pleased to have him on the show tonight. He'll be coming up at 7:30 to 5 to 8. And if you're watching on TikTok, you won't hear him. Unfortunately, you'll need to go to our youtube.com/UK, a force for good. And we've also got our competition coming up at the bottom of the hour, also for our Union Jack playing cards, along with a free copy of our latest magazine, King and Country. Fantastic stuff. Now, some people will say, who is David Kurten? We've got a couple of clips. Let's play the first one of David Kurten on GB News. And he's talking about immigration in this particular clip that we're...
You can't separate the housing crisis from mass rapid immigration that we've had over the last 20 years. I mean, over that period, we've built about 4 million houses in the country, but there's been 8 million people coming into the country, as well as natural population growth. It's just simply not enough to cope with the number of people coming. And those are the people we know about. It doesn't include the people that we don't know about, who come over on, in the back of a lorry, for example, and then disappear into the black economy. So, there's many, many more people than are in the official statistics. So, to solve the housing crisis, the number one thing is we got to get a grip of immigration, because you're never going to solve it when you're keeping on having more and more people coming into the country. And last year, as you said, 606,000 net. It's just a disaster for people who want to buy a house.
The voice of common sense. If you want to solve the housing crisis, you need to get a grip of immigration. So obvious, but so few politicians will actually grasp that net. Well, thankfully, David Kurten is saying it loudly and proudly, and he's also a skeptic, as we are of the government's drive to net zero. Let's hear what he's got to say about that.
This is not an extreme opinion. This is a majority opinion that people do not want climate alarmism. We don't want net zero policies. We don't.
The majority of the public wants net zero.
No, I don't think so. I don't.
Well, the polling shows that.
I don't think so. I think that's what we're getting through some of the mainstream media channels and through the main political
You think that the pollsters have just made it all up and actually people are against net zero?
You can't tell. Sometimes the polls, they do surveys which get them the right results by asking the right questions. But I know a lot of people who want to carry on using their petrol and diesel cars. If you said to people, do you want petrol and diesel cars to be banned in 2030, which is what the Conservative Party is saying, the majority of people will say, no, I don't want to have to give up my petrol and diesel cars. If you ask people, would you want to give up your gas boilers and have a heat pump, they would say no. If you said, would you want more expensive electricity because we're going to get rid of all our coal, oil and gas and go to wind and solar, people would say no because they don't want more expensive electricity. So it depends on what question you ask people, what result you get in a poll.
So that video there also showed that David is very switched on when it comes to the subtle art of propaganda and being able to see through propaganda. And there he was talking about opinion polls and how they can be swayed simply by the question that is asked. And so we'll be touching on those sorts of subjects with David tonight, as well as hearing about his main position, which is leader of the Heritage Party. So that's coming up at 7:30. Really looking forward to that. Thanks for sending in your comments there on TikTok, folks. You won't see the videos that we play, but you'll hear me, hopefully, on TikTok. Good stuff. Any questions you've got, send them in on TikTok and also send them in here if you have any questions for David. Let's have a wee look at the comments. Derek was in first tonight. Alistair and everyone at AFFG enjoyed last weekend's street stall. It was a great result. Looking forward to our guest, David Kurten. Debbie says, good evening, everyone. Fed up with all this rain now. Absolutely. Hi to Melissa. Hope you're having a good evening. And hello to Kat, who's looking forward to hearing from Mr. Kurten later, as we all are. Adam says, evening from the heart of rural England. You seem pretty cheerful. Has something great happened today? Life has happened today. I'm glad I sound cheerful. That's good. Hello to Stuart. Good evening from Elgin. Has anything particularly good happened with you, Adam? If it has, please do tell us your good news. Paul from the Garden of England says hello, as does Catherine. And Adam says, Mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth, those were the by-elections last week, have gone red. A Labour government throughout the United Kingdom is almost imminent. It is, and it would be throughout the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, Adam, wouldn't it? Yeah, absolutely. It seems imminent, although it looks like Keir Starmer is having some trouble with some of his members and regarding his position on the conflict abroad. They're not all getting behind him, so that might be causing him some trouble. We might touch on that with David Kurten, because David made a video today on the very subject of Keir Starmer's issues with a very large swathe, shall we say, of his Labour Party not going along with his particular position on the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Derek from Armadale says hello, and Scotland Scorpion says she's on time. Well, Scotland Scorpion, please do send in your biting comments. If scorpions bite, or do they sting? I'm not sure. Your stinging comments. Adam says our next guest should be from the SNP or Greens or Alba, or a pro-indie fringe party. That would be funny. All of us here will be sitting with our popcorn and 3D glasses. Oh, well, I wonder if there's any who would want to come on the show. None have approached us to date, Adam. I suppose if somebody did approach us, we would consider it. But sometimes you don't want to hear stuff one already. Well, I don't know. Maybe it might be an idea. Adam. Thank you for that. It is indeed a great guest that's coming on. Slim's never used TikTok. Well, there's some good videos that you can get on TikTok, I have to say, that can change your mind on some issues. I found it actually quite educational. It depends who you follow, as everything does. But if you follow interesting accounts, you can get a lot of information that you wouldn't normally get on the mainstream channels. Now, hi Kathy, and to British legends. Scotland Scorpion says we sting. Stuart's not a big fan of Labour, but says anything is better than the SNP. Now, talking about mainstream channels, I was alerted to the fact that there's a programme on, and I'd be very interested if anybody has seen it. It's called Union. It's a 4-parter, I think, by David Olagusa. I may be saying that correctly or not. And it's on BBC. It's now on iPlayer, and it was tracing the history of the Union. So you'll still be able to catch it on iPlayer if you haven't seen it. I have not seen it. I only got alerted to it very recently after it had just finished its run. I'm particularly interested in it because I was actually interviewed for it. This was at least 18 months ago. I was contacted and I was asked to go along to the studio that they were interviewing people at, not far from where I stay. And this was at 8:15 in the morning. And I was put into a darkened studio with all the lights on me. And a very pleasant person interviewed me for half an hour. And I don't know if they got anything of value at 8:15 in the morning from me, although I think I did well. But I don't know if they've used any of it. I know that they have talking heads, just random people making comments. So did anybody see it? And was I on it? Does anybody know? I was certainly interviewed for it. I will watch it myself, though. I will watch it myself, and we'll eventually find out. Christopher's in the house, and he says, wishing all Unionists a wonderful British evening. Paul says, the traditional reason to vote Conservative was to stop Labour because they were so bad. Now that the Conservatives are so bad, it makes more sense to vote Labour. Well, maybe ask our guest, David Kurten, the leader of the Heritage Party, how he would respond to that. I'm sure he would understand what you mean. He might have his own position on that. Good. Right. Well, the first thing I would like to do is to have our Busting Indy Myths that we wanted to do last week, okay? And we didn't get a chance because we were so busy last week. So this is going to be Busting Indy Myths, Part 28. Busting Indy Myths, Part 28. And in this Busting Indy Myths, we're going to address the oft-heard claim that somehow Margaret Thatcher believed that all it would take for the SNP to make an independent Scotland would be if they got a majority of MPs in the House of Commons. Now, we are going to spend the next few minutes explaining that Margaret Thatcher never said such a thing, and even if she had said such a thing, she would have been wrong. Okay? So, Margaret Thatcher did not claim that a majority of SNP MPs would be sufficient for independence. But who's starting this? Who's been saying this? Well, at the SNP conference back a couple of Sundays ago, I think now, Keith Brown was quoted at least twice in saying it, and we've got the videos here, and we'll play the videos so that you can see what we're talking about. So let's play the first video here.
But the point is, Margaret Thatcher was explicit in recognising the fact that if we win, the SNP win a majority of seats at a Westminster election, that is a mandate for independence.
But the point is, this is him, Margaret Thatcher was explicit in recognising the fact that if we win, the SNP win a majority of seats at a Westminster election, that is a mandate for independence. Okay, now a majority of seats, if you're talking about an overall majority of the 59 seats, that would be 29 seats. So did Margaret Thatcher ever imply such a thing? Well, Keith's not going to stop, and he's telling us again the very next day, on Tuesday, October 2023, in an interview with BBC Politics Live, he expanded upon his considered opinion. Let's watch that video.
If we win the election in Scotland, i.e. we win the most seats at that election, then we will have a mandate to start independence negotiations. Now, it's not a new idea. Margaret Thatcher agreed this way back in the 1980s, that the party, the SNP, if they win the largest majority of seats in Scotland, they have the right to fulfil that mandate for independence.
So he slightly changes it there. He says, if we win the election, i.e. we win the most seats at that election, then we will have a mandate to start independence negotiations. Okay, so the day before it was he'd have a mandate for independence, as in, that's it guys, let's pack up and we're leaving. But the next day it's, oh, that's just a mandate to begin negotiations for independence. And then he says, now, it's not a new idea. Margaret Thatcher agreed this. Oh, she agreed it, did she? With whom? Way back in the 1980s, that the party, the SNP, if they win the largest majority of seats in Scotland, they have the right to fulfil that mandate for independence. Well, obviously, that's interesting. So what we have to do then is to find out, well, did she ever say that? And nobody has been able to find her ever saying that in Parliament. And you can check by going onto the Hansard website and searching for Margaret Thatcher's comments on separation. And to be frank with you, she didn't really say very much, because back then, when she was in power, Scottish independence was not an issue. It was not an issue at the polls. Okay, there was always people voting for the SNP, but they were always just getting a handful of candidates, MPs elected, and it wasn't really a big issue, so it wasn't something that she had to really think about. However, she did at that time get involved with that whole idea of having a Scottish Assembly. And that did muddy the waters a bit. But even then, nobody can find any information of her saying such a thing. The closest that we've ever found is a paragraph which appears in her biography. Margaret Thatcher, The Downing Street Years, here on page 624. And I'll just read out the bit. We'll put up the picture of this page 624. Page 624. And you can read it with me, as it were. Let's get rid of that banner so we can see it properly. There we go. The bit that I have penciled there. In fact, I'll read it from just above that. The Tory party is not, of course, an English party, but a Unionist one, says Margaret Thatcher. If it sometimes seems English to some, that is because the Union is inevitably dominated by England by reason of its greater population. The Scots, being a historic nation with a proud past, will inevitably resent some expressions of this fact from time to time. And this is the sentence. This is the one. As a nation, they have an undoubted right to national self-determination. Thus far, they have exercised that right by joining and remaining in the Union. That's the sentence, and that sentence doesn't say anything that we don't already know, or which in itself is particularly controversial. She's just pointing out that Scots exercise their right to national self-determination by staying in the Union. She then goes on, perhaps a little bit more controversially, should they determine on independence, no English party or politician would stand in their way. Well, I think if you're an English politician and you want the UK to stay together, then you do have a right to be heard and to argue that Scotland should stay. Quite frankly, I don't think that point had occurred to Mrs. Thatcher when she wrote that particular sentence. However, that's really all that needs to be said there. Okay. So that's the point that she was making. And, you know, even if she had said, which she clearly hasn't said, but even if she had said that a majority of seats at the Westminster Parliament would be sufficient for the SNP to begin independence negotiations, even if she had said that, she would have been wrong. You know, she would have been constitutionally in error. So it's funny that the SNP should suddenly love Thatcher now that they've found a fake quote that they can misrepresent. Oh, Mrs. Thatcher said it, so it must be true. Well, I thought you didn't like Mrs. Thatcher. Oh, we don't like her, but we like her now that she said that. Some of these folk are all over the place. So we can basically say that it's a complete myth that Mrs. Thatcher ever said such a thing. Mrs. Thatcher never said that a majority of SNP MPs would be enough for independence. Okay, here ends Busting Indy Myths, part 28. Now, just talking about mandates, because we're going to be hearing a wee bit more of this. The original mandate that when Sturgeon was in power a few months ago, what she wanted at next year's general election was to begin independence negotiations if a majority of voters on the day, if 50% plus one voters on the day voted for the SNP. However, that's quite a big ask, so they downgraded it to simply the SNP having a majority of seats, but not necessarily a supermajority of seats, by which I mean if the SNP had 26 seats and Labour had 24 seats and the Tories had 7 seats, then in a 57-seat parliament, that would be a majority. But they've changed that as well, and now they're going for a supermajority of seats, which would be 29 out of 57. But, which they might get, as I say, and they might get it because if Labour continues down the Keir Starmer road of supporting a war in the Middle East, that will send a lot of people back to the SNP at the polls on the day. We saw that during the Blair era, and we mentioned that last week. Now, folks, we've got David Kurten coming up at the bottom of the hour at 7:30. That's the leader of the Heritage Party and a well-known politician and political commentator. If you're on TikTok, you won't see the interview. You'll only hear me when I speak because it's on the computer here that I'm looking at. Now, any comments that we've got to read out. Yes, they were meant to be independent on the 19th of October 2023. Yeah, last Thursday there was going to be a referendum, wasn't there? That never happened. Paul says unionism is self-determination. That's absolutely right. It is. It is. In fact, that's worth a screenshot with a wee book. Christopher says nationalists are simply propagandists who will twist the truth to suit their ends. William says, labouring under a false image. Also the Conservatives are the same. Now, just before we bring on David at the bottom of the hour, we're going to have our On This Day in British History, and afterwards I'll ask you a quick question about that, and the winner will get a pack of Union Jack playing cards and also our latest magazine, King and Country, which is retailing for £4.50. But the winner will get it free of charge. Now, if you haven't entered our competition, please do so. Very easy to do so. All you need to do is send an email to contact@aforceforgood.uk. And if you haven't entered before, you'll be in with a good chance of winning. Now, on this day in British history, well, on this day in British history was the Battle of Balaclava on the 25th of October in 1854, and it's gone down in history for a couple of famous military actions, one of which was the charge of the Light Brigade, which didn't work out so well, and the other, which did work out very well, was the Thin Red Line. Now, the Thin Red Line was a line of the 93rd Sutherland Highlanders, and they repulsed a Russian cavalry charge, and they were led by the Glaswegian Sir Colin Campbell, and they've gone down in history largely as a result of this famous painting, which we'll put up by Robert Gibb. And there was approximately 200 Highlanders, and the Colin Campbell rode up and down in front of them, a bit like William Wallace, and he said, "There is no retreat from here, men. You must die where you stand." And they were put into a line too deep in order to fire at various distances, but they didn't get a chance to fire at point blank range because the Russian leader withdrew his forces, and it said that he saw such a thin line he couldn't believe that they were standing against his cavalry, and that it had to be a trick to hide a greater force of men behind him. And to this day, the phrase "the thin red line" has become synonymous with British bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. And we've got a picture of Colin Campbell's statue, which is in George Square here in Glasgow. And so he's a proud son of Glasgow. There's also a statue to him in Waterloo Place in London. And so that was the Thin Red Line on this day. And we have our own, we like to call our activists the Thin Red Line as well. We are, as we say, the Thin Red Line standing for the Union. Now, our task is made a lot easier because there's no Russian cavalry charging down on us. But whenever large numbers of the Scottish nationalists have a march, we have our Thin Red Line with our red banners and our red flags, and we stand up for the United Kingdom. So we like to use that phrase, the Thin Red Line, and of course it has precedent in British history. I'll ask you a question about that in a minute, and the winner will get some Union Jack playing cards. Just checking on. Now I see David is in the room. So before I bring David in, I'll actually ask the question. The question is a very easy one. It is, what is the nickname given to the Highlanders who repulsed the Russian cavalry charge at the Battle of Balaclava on this day? What's the nickname given? I've just mentioned it. That's an easy one. Send your answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk. Now, folks, we have got David Kurten, leader of the Heritage Party. Please send in your greetings for him and any questions or comments that you may have. Let me bring on David right now.
Hello.
Hello, David. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you very much for coming on to our show tonight as a guest. We've had several people ask and get David Kurten on, and I thought that this was a good week to bring you on because you've been very busy on social media as well. So just by way of introduction, for those folk who don't know, I just want to read the first paragraph from your Heritage Party website, which says, quote, "For far too long, the United Kingdom has been led down a path of managed decline by successive governments, and the current government is ruining our society, culture and economy. We are a great nation and we deserve better. We have a glorious history and a wonderful heritage which has been given to us by our forefathers, which we should enjoy and build upon to pass on to our children and grandchildren." Well, 3 cheers for that. And I don't think you'll see that paragraph on any other party political website, quite frankly. So please tell us what inspired you to set up the Heritage Party to promote that particular message.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. Well, thanks for having me on the show, first of all. But yeah, I wrote that about 3 years ago, actually, because I set the Heritage Party up in 2020. And at the time, there was nothing in the sort of space that I was in. So I was elected onto the London Assembly in 2016. So you and people watching might have seen me over many, many years questioning Sadiq Khan in London. There's a lot to question there because he does a lot of very dubious things. But, you know, I was in another political party before I set up the Heritage Party, but there was nothing really in the sort of Brexit space that at that time, you know, the Brexit Party had deactivated. There was nothing else going on. So I thought we need a socially conservative party in the UK. And there isn't one because the Conservatives have got the name, but they're fake. They're not real Conservatives. In fact, in many cases, in many ways, they're anti-conservative. They're not protecting and conserving our heritage and our nation and the fabric of society. They are running it down. For example, and one thing that I really it concerns me, and I've been campaigning against for a long time, is this relationships and sexuality education in whatever form it is going into schools across the nation. They actually implemented it in England, just like the SNP implemented it in Scotland and Labour implemented it in Wales. And so, you know, that's just one example of where the Conservatives are not conservative. And the whole of the political sphere, the Westminster parties are basically one Uni-Party. They're just doing the same thing. They've coalesced, and there may be small differences between some of them, but they're all pushing the woke agenda, the climate agenda. They all supported lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. And we need something that is going to stand all against all of those things. And our strapline, our motto, if you like, is freedom, family, nation, which summarizes what we're for, in 3 words. So I set the Heritage Party up to be a socially conservative party with positive principles that we would stick to consistently, which I think the nation needs to get back to restore what we were and the wonderful heritage that has been left to us from our forefathers, but which has been systematically broken down over many decades.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it in 2020, and that was such a revolutionary year, revolutionary against Britain in many ways, because not only were we locked down, which went against our national tradition of freedom of movement, But those of us who spoke up against government policy often found ourselves silenced. And in fact, there was government, and there still is, government offices running to shut people down who don't go along with the trends. And there was also, of course, the whole, for want of a better expression, the BLM thing, which was literally anti-heritage, anti-British history, or certainly misrepresenting British history, put it that way. So it was good to see you largely alone, really, in many ways, fighting back against that. You mentioned there that we have a Uni-Party in charge. Have you ever figured out how that Uni-Party has come about? Why should it have gone like that we've got two parties who are so similar?
I think they've all signed up to the various different agendas which are coming from globalist bodies which set themselves up above nation states. Obviously the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and so on, and the Bank of International Settlements with what they want to do. So, the UN has got Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. That's pushing all of the climate alarmism, that they want to dismantle our energy infrastructure. So you see every single party is totally beholden to this climate emergency, as they call it. There is no climate emergency because carbon dioxide is not harmful, but they signed up to this. The sexuality education is part of that. The World Health Organization is pushing that as well, and they have a grid of outcomes and things that they want to teach children on, and it's absolutely disgusting. And that's why you see materials going into schools which teach children about self-pleasure, to put it in the mildest form possible, to 4 and 5 year olds, which is absolutely appalling. And then you've got, obviously, the World Economic Forum is pushing the "you will own nothing and be happy" agenda, and so essentially to take away private property, and also you're pushing everything that happened in the lockdown period and the COVID period with these experimental injections going on, which comes back to what you said at the beginning, is that 2020 was a terrible year. And all of the parties in Westminster, all of the MPs together voted for the Coronavirus Act. Not a single one voted against it, even though they said, some of them beat their breasts and said, how terrible it was, but they voted for it anyway. And then there was the propaganda coming from the behavioral psychology units that would call people like me and you and anyone who stood against it as COVIDiots and granny killers and vaccine refuseniks, and all of these new words they made up to smear people, conspiracy theorists, and so on. And this is what I got called from almost everybody all over the place, because actually at the beginning in 2020, I think I was the only elected politician at all who opposed lockdowns and opposed the injections on the basis that there is no long-term safety data. With my scientific background, I can tell you, every single medicine and drug and pharmaceutical that comes onto the market needs to go through rigorous safety and efficacy testing for about 10 years before it gets anywhere near the market. But this was just dosed into people after 3 months. There's clearly, you just don't do that. But everybody did it anyway, and then tried to smear and discredit anyone who stuck to the normal procedure of needing long-term safety data.
Yes.
It was very obvious to me that they were all in it together, and they're all pushing things that are being done to harm people. And, it's absolutely appalling, and we need to speak up against it.
Yes. Do you see this agenda as being a deliberately, well, you sort of alluded to it there, as a deliberately harmful one, or do you see it as simply something that it's just a load of people who don't really know what they're doing and they're just mucking up, and there might be some bad consequences, but they don't really realize it? Or do you think, no, there's actually a militant evil
I think there's different levels. There's different levels of people. I do think it is a planned agenda. The people right at the top who are pushing it, they know what's going on. And the idea is, this is a plan that's been going on for a long time, and there are different aspects of it. I feel like I'm fighting 20 different battles at the same time, but it is ultimately to get rid of nation states, get rid of families, get rid of private property. Those are the three things which are in the Communist Manifesto from Karl Marx in 1848. So it's essentially the implementation of communism in sort of ideologically, but there's much more added to it now with the technology that we've got, and with the technocracy that will run a one world system, a government system with AI, added on top of what was there 150 years ago. So there are some people who actively want to do this. They want to cause chaos in order to impoverish people, destroy small businesses, destroy livelihoods, and take away people's property through financial crises. And then also the regulations which are coming in to do with climate and buildings having to adhere to new climate regulations and have a certain energy rating. And if your house or home doesn't adhere to those new regulations, then you won't be able to sell it or rent it and eventually live in it. So, that's just another aspect of the many different things coming against us. But sorry, within that, there's a whole class of useful idiots who think that it's a good thing, who actually genuinely believed that because they were lied to and deceived, sadly, very easily, to think that everybody needed a COVID injection to protect them against COVID, which is nonsense, and that mass immigration is a good thing. And if you're against that, then you're racist. And then we also need to save the planet, so we need to stop using our cars, and all these different things. So there's a lot of people who are brainwashed so easily, and that is the disturbing thing: is that how can a nation which has such a great history have a whole, the majority of society is so easily going along with all the propaganda which is put into their heads. It's quite frightening. But then also people making money out of it too, which is a whole other thing.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Well, you ask how can people go along with it? I think we're entering a stage where people's brains have not yet caught up with the ability to handle the barrage of information that we're subjected to, because we're not really meant as human beings to be subjected to all of these images and all of these problems and all of these choices and all of these sorts of things. We're really just meant to take the day as it comes and very quietly just live in the woods and hunt rabbits and stuff like that. We're not meant to suddenly be worrying about what's happening in the other side of the world or having an opinion on it, or then trying to understand whether a vaccine is good or bad or for you. It's like too much information. Most people can't handle it. And so the natural default position for so many people, understandably, is just to say, well, that group look like they know what they're talking about, or I favour the way that guy looks over the way that other party politician looks like. So I'm just going to go with what they say. And that's just a natural kind of default. But that means that so many of us can get taken along with stuff. And we're seeing that all of these things, COVID and all of the wars that have happened and that are happening and so on, people forced to go along with things and make choices that very often they're just following somebody else's agenda, really. That's the bad thing. You mentioned, of course, you said that you had a background in chemistry. You used to be a chemistry teacher, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. For nearly 20 years, I was a chemistry teacher up to A-level and IB diploma level here and also abroad as well. So, I mean, that's been fantastic. And it does give me that.
You went to St. Andrews University.
Right, I did. Yeah. I loved it. I had a wonderful time at St. Andrews for 4 years, when I was young. And so, that was my university.
Why did you pick St. Andrews? Because most people, if I suppose you were living in England at the time, they just pick the nearest university to them.
It just looked amazing, and it looked so nice, and there's so much history, so much tradition. You don't really know everything about every university in the country. You just do your research, look at things, but it was very good. A university for science and everything, and I was delighted to be offered a place. Being Scotland's oldest university and the third oldest university in the country, I guess I was drawn to the place having a lot of history and a lot of heritage and being a beautiful, beautiful city.
Well, there you go. It would be that part of you that values the historical past. You saw St Andrews, as you just said there, as something with the heritage that there'd be that perhaps that you were subconsciously drawn to. Paul sent a question in here. Says, David, can you shed any light on the shocking event of an elections hustings at which you were going to speak in Lewisham being shut down by extremists? What excuses did the police offer?
That was a long time ago. That was June 2018. So that was over 5 years ago now. I was going into a hustings. The Labour and the Tory candidate didn't turn up. There was another party there called For Britain, and the police made the excuse that they were far-right extremists and they were coming to disrupt the meeting. But they didn't even turn up at the meeting. But there was actually a huge crowd of Stand Up to Racism people, which is an arm's-length Labour Party organisation. And they were intimidating everybody going in. And I was shouted at and nearly spat on as I went in. But I mean, I'm a big guy, so I wasn't too intimidated by it. But a lot of other people in the audience, were. Who obviously is not as big as I am. So, and then after 20 minutes, the candidates gave the speeches and the police decided to close the meeting. I mean, never heard anything like that in my life. This was a hustings for an election, and there was a crowd of far left outside agitating, causing all kinds of problems, acting like they were going to have a riot and storm the meeting, and the police closed it down. And, I asked Sadiq Khan about it later on in the London Assembly, and he just read some statement out which was full of untruths about the event, basically. So, it was just complete rubbish that they said. They just made up an excuse and blamed, it was the far right, the far right were going to turn up, which is absolute nonsense.
They were going to turn up, but never turned up. But the ones that turned up and actually did turn up, they stopped it. It was like crazy.
Right.
Yeah. Good. Well, do you have plans for next year's general election? It's a Heritage Party planning to stand in it.
I want to stand in as many places as we possibly can. So I'm taking on candidates. I'm interviewing candidates. We have in many places around the country. Obviously, there's new constituencies going to be in place for the next general election because they're changing the boundaries. But we will just work and we'll stand as many people as we can with whatever we can do. So we will just. I have a long-term vision, so there'll be the local elections this year, the coming up in May 2024, the general election. But we just need to we're here for the long term. So we will just do whatever we can.
Good. What I liked when I was reading through the Heritage Party website is that you seem to be working from fundamental principles on all of your matters. So that means that you don't get blown by the winds of outrageous fortune or whatever happens to be the thing of the day. And you made a tweet back on the 22nd of October. You said, quote, right-wing commentators have for years upheld the right to free speech for everyone, even if that speech is offensive to some. We should continue to uphold free speech for everyone, including both pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian rallies. And I thought, well, I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see that somebody else thinks the same as I do, because I had been shocked by some right-wing, as you say, commentators who love to talk about freedom of speech and how it's so bad that they get cancelled. And then there's some pro-Palestinian demo, and they're the first people to jump up and say, this is outrageous, this shouldn't be happening, arrest these people, send them home. You know,
yeah.
Was that what made you?
No, absolutely. I'm exactly the same. I found that very disturbing that you had some people I know, you know, in the right-wing commentariat space who have been free speech, free speech, free speech. Our free speech has been taken away. We need free speech. We stand up for this. And then this happens, and suddenly, where's free speech? It's gone. You know, people should not be allowed to say this word or that word, or this march should be closed down. And I know within the march, there were some individuals doing things which are very unsavory and perhaps going beyond, you know, the bounds of free speech and inciting violence. And that's absolutely right that they should be arrested as individuals and charged as individuals. But, you know, to actually say this rally must not happen because we don't agree with it, once you go down that road, then the other side can say to us, well, you shouldn't be allowed to have your rally or do your things. And what was happened already in law is that the left have made it a criminal offense to pray and protest outside abortion centers, you know, and everyone, I think, on the right wing would agree that that is, you know, a blatant attack on free speech. It shouldn't have happened. Not even Germany has done that. They still allow that to happen. But when we need to uphold the principle, and we always say, even if it's offensive to some people, you should be able to say it, you know? I mean, you don't be abusive. You don't harass people, you don't incite violence or glorify terrorism, of course, but you should be allowed to express your opinion or support for something without being closed down. You know, I mean, so that's why I put that tweet out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make the good point there about praying as well, and how that's just going to be used against us. I saw some people saying, you know how you see these pictures of all these Muslims are always down on their knees praying, and some people don't like that. And I'd rather there wasn't a huge population of non-Christians, but you can't say that they can't pray. Obviously, they can pray. You know, unless if you're gonna say no praying, then who's the first people who are going to get hit by that? Christians.
Exactly. I mean, I do think, you know, that where there was the mass prayer in Whitehall, I don't agree with that because they closed down the public highway, you know. So, I mean, that's another issue. But, you know, if they want to go and pray in the park, yeah, okay, they can go and pray in the park. You know, they're not hurting anybody. But, you know, the other issue and the other side of that is I don't agree with mass rapid immigration, which has happened over 30 or so years of Labour and Tory. So we've got the issue. That's another issue that needs to be dealt with. But, you know, if people are here, they should have the freedom to speak and to express themselves, provided that they're not, you know, doing anything which is breaking the law.
Yes, and we've always had those laws in the sense that you can't incite to a crime. That is, you can't incite to violence or incite to arson or incite to any other crime, because that is a crime in itself. You're encouraging people to commit a crime. But if you're just saying unsavory language that some people have a different opinion about, then that's a different matter entirely. But they came up with this clever concept of hate speech, which people like yourselves no doubt always campaigned against, because you could see how that could easily just be drawn into
defined?
How's it defined? It's speech that I don't like is essentially what it comes down to. Yeah. I also want to raise the matter with you. I saw a really, really good video that you did, because you're basically doing almost like a video a day these days.
Right, I'm trying,
really, that requires a lot of effort. But anyway, you did one the other day, and I would really encourage people to watch this, because it's very unusual. And you spoke about the concept of Judeo-Christian. And I know that the Heritage Party is an overtly Christian party. And you were pointing out that this phrase never existed really in any way prior to 1935. Right. And in fact, it is a misleading phrase because it gives the impression that these are two equivalent religions that are almost compatible with each other in a sense. Would you like to just explain? We'll put the link up in our threads for that video so other people can see it. But I found it very illuminating. What was the the thinking behind you coming out
Yeah,
with that?
I mean, this is a phrase which is almost ubiquitous at the moment, and people hear it and they don't even think about the phrase. It's like a propaganda phrase. It was actually promoted in the 1930s and 1940s to bring common cause between Jews and Christians, mostly in America, against National Socialism, against Hitler and everybody. And obviously it sort of caught on in Europe as well, and then it stayed with us. But it was never used at all before the 1930s. It was a couple of people randomly used the phrase, here and there, but not to mean, that Jews and Christians had some common culture, common history, common heritage. Because before then, the two religions were seen as completely distinct. Evolving after Jesus. Obviously, Christians accept that Jesus is the Messiah. He died and rose again. And then we have the New Testament. The Jews then didn't accept Jesus. They had the Babylonian Talmud, was written in the 2nd to 4th century, which says horrible things about Jesus. And then later on, there's the Kabbalah, was developed in the 13th century, actually in France. So it's a completely distinct religion with its own books. And some Jews, obviously will respect the Old Testament as well. But some, you have Talmudic Jews and Kabbalistic Jews as well, who put an emphasis on those other two books. And so this is really something I just wanted to bring into the conversation to highlight, because at the moment, with the situation going on in Israel, Palestine, everybody is being manipulated to support one side or the other. And I completely understand Jews supporting Israel. I completely understand Arabs supporting Palestine. But it's so strange when Anglo-Saxons and German people and Scandinavians and Slavic people have been programmed to have a visceral emotional support or reaction for one side or the other. It doesn't make any sense. But I think especially Christians, Protestant Christians in America particularly, but also in Europe and other places where Protestantism is strong, have been programmed with phrases like this concept of Judeo-Christian. We have a Judeo-Christian heritage and culture. Therefore, you must support Israel over Palestine. And that is this is not actually what should be the case. This is not how, this is not, has no historical foundation before the 1930s and 1940s. So I think this is just something I wanted to bring to people's attention so they could think about it.
Yes, I'm glad that you did, because I had been mystified by looking at Twitter and seeing Americans in particular who were almost psychopathically opposed to the Palestinians and were openly calling for basically genocide. And then you go on to this person's account and he calls himself a Christian. Yeah. I'm like, what? That makes no sense, because as you pointed out in that video, there's a lot of Christians in Gaza. Right. There's all the Arab Christians that we always forget about. And I think we forget about them because we're made to not to think that it's just like European Christians and Jews in the Middle East. And in that phrase, Judeo-Christianity, that's what it tends to make us think, without us realizing that there's all these Arab Christians as well who are all caught up in the conflict, and we're forgetting about them. Yeah, and they've got their opinions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's about 5 times as many Palestinian Christians as there are Israeli Christians, Messianic Jews. Yeah, there's about 30,000 Messianic Jews, as I understand, living in Israel, which is fantastic. But 150 to 200,000 Palestinian Christians, mostly in the West Bank, not that many in Gaza, but the number is going down. I think there's only 1,000 or so left. But the third oldest church in the world, St. Porphyrius Church, I think, is in Gaza and was recently bombed in a building belonging to the church was bombed recently by the Israeli Defense Force, and killing a lot of Christians who were, seeking shelter there. So, we need to realize that there's many Arab Christians who get completely cancelled, if you like. It's almost as though their existence is not mentioned, as though people don't want to even acknowledge that they exist. But, before 9/11 and the war on terror, there were tens of thousands millions of Arab Christians, particularly in Syria and Iraq, living very happily. Lebanon was once a majority Christian country. It's changed now because of massive immigration into Lebanon. But yeah, and also in Palestine, in Egypt. There's 20% of Egypt are Coptic Christians. So there's huge numbers. And my main concern for the Middle East is that, as a Christian, obviously, is my Christian brethren will have the freedom to worship freely and to be able to share the gospel freely. That's my main concern for the Middle East.
Fantastic. Well, do you know what? I'm so thankful that you are doing what you're doing, David, because you are, at the moment, you're fairly a lone voice in that effort, but a powerful one and a very sincere one. So thank you for everything that you do in that regard. And I do encourage people to check out heritageparty.org, and also David is on Twitter at twitter.com/David Kurten. And for people listening on our podcast, Kurten is Kurten. And you've also got, I think, as your personal website where you put up your videos, which is davidkurten.net. And they're worth checking out. David, that's a half hour, went very, very quickly.
Oh, yes.
Thank you so much. We'd love to have you back on again sometime. No doubt there'll be plenty more to speak about. All I can say at the moment is thanks again, and Godspeed. God bless you and your fantastic work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay. Good night.
Good night. Good to be with you.
Cheers. Bye now. David Kurten, ladies and gentlemen, a man that we need to hear a lot more from, and a wonderful politician. Good stuff. Stuart says, thanks, David. Great stuff. Christopher says, excellent. Oksana says, thanks, David. Great interview. TC says, David Kurten is a genuine person. Catherine says, very interesting. Good stuff, good stuff. Well, we have a winner for our competition. Now, we asked the question for this pack of playing cards. What was the nickname given to the Highlanders who repulsed the Scottish cavalry at the Battle of Balaclava on this day in 1854? And the answer was the Thin Red Line. And the winner is Jeff Baker. Jeff, congratulations. We'll be sending you those cards tomorrow, and we'll be sending you this magazine, King and Country, as well. Folks, you can get King and Country at our shop, or you can ask for it free if you are a monthly donor. And what you can also get at our shop is our wee book for the Union, and also this book, Scotland Now, A Warning to the World, and also this badge. Let's take it off. Good stuff. Catherine says, congrats, Jeff. As does Stuart. And Paul says, David for Prime Minister. I would second that emotion. Folks, we'll be back next Wednesday. Thank you very much for all your comments. Thanks to all our viewers. Thanks for sharing and giving us a thumbs up. And thanks to folks sending in your messages also on TikTok. We'll be back next week. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.